All right, everyone. This is Jeff Gunnelson from AFPM. I manage our security committee here. Today's webinar is on the Coast Guard Cybersecurity NAVIC. I'll hand it over to Dennis Ryan from Coke to do the introductions for the webinar. Dennis?
Yeah, hey, good morning. Thanks, Jeff. My name is Dennis Ryan. I'm a security manager with Koch Industries Corporate Security and a current member of the AFPM Security Committee. I just want to welcome everyone to this morning's session of our 2020 security webinar series. This morning's session is entitled Cybersecurity Compliance for MTSA Facilities. A few reminders before we get started. This session is held in accordance with AFPM's antitrust guidelines. If you have any questions on the guidelines, please reach out to a member of the AFPM staff. Please mute your line if you're not speaking. There will be time at the end for questions, answers, and discussion. And please feel free to use the chat feature, which AFPM staff will be monitoring during the webcast. Finally, please note that this session is being recorded. By participating, you authorize AFPM and ABS Group to post to their websites or social media, all or part of the content of this webinar. So now that we have a few of those formalities out of the way, I would like to introduce our two speakers for today's session, Dennis Hackney and Marcia Lee. Dennis is the head of ABS Group Cyber Solutions Development. Dennis specializes in the integration of IT and OT cyber risk management solutions for marine and offshore environments and carries over 20 years of experience in technology security compliance. Dennis leads compliance and technology development solutions with ABS Group, and he executes programs that address today's most ominous cybersecurity needs, as well as oversees deployment of new services for large-scale commercial and government fleets. Dennis holds a PhD in information security from Capella University. Alongside Dennis is Marcia Lee. Marcia is a manager of business development for ABS Group, specializing in cybersecurity services for marine, offshore, and government entities. Marcia previously performed industrial cybersecurity consulting as an engineer and now works with clients to identify cybersecurity needs and scope cybersecurity risk management programs. Marcia holds a degree in naval engineering from Stevens Institute of Technology. And with that, a very happy, warm welcome to both of you to today's forum. And I'll hand the floor over to both of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis and Jeff. First and foremost, we'd like to thank AFPM for hosting us for this webinar. We're very excited to be here. Cybersecurity for industrial control environments has become quite a hot topic in the last few years. We're seeing more and more cyber events that threaten physical operations, and regulatory bodies are starting to put out requirements to ensure companies take this seriously. So today we'll be discussing this year's NAVIC 120 issued by the Coast Guard, how to satisfy it, and also how to address cyber in general for facilities. Since Dennis gave our intros, I'll just get right into the presentation. Let me share my screen here. Okay, please let me know if you can't see this. It looks like it's up there. So Dennis already mentioned some of these housekeeping points, but please stay muted, and we will be taking questions at the end, so feel free to use the chat bar to enter your questions throughout the duration of the webinar. We'll circle back to them. A recording of this webinar will be available either through AFPM or ABS Group, and just give us a few days to get that uploaded. And just a reminder, when you're asking questions, please do not enter any sensitive security information. I understand we're discussing facilities. You might want to talk about a specific scenario, but please try to avoid any specific system information. Okay, so being that ABS Group is a safety-driven company, we always start meetings and events with a safety moment. From there, we will begin the presentation talking about some real-world incidents, cybersecurity incidents, and how these attacks are ever evolving. Getting into the more technical side, we will then discuss cybersecurity specific to operational facilities and what specific challenges we see in this environment. After addressing those fundamentals, we'll provide an overview of the recently issued NAVIC 120 and how it relates to the existing requirements in the 33 CFR 105 and 106. We'll also address a recent bulletin issued by the Coast Guard that reinforces the NAVIC and which promotes a recent CISA alert, which provides recognized best practices for your facility that overview. We will then discuss transportation security incidents, how we classify those, and I'll also walk through an example scenario. And from there, we'll address the role of the facility security officer, the FSO. We'll dive a little deeper into the NAVIC 120 guidelines, specifically what they say, and discuss our recommendations for setting up an incident command center before I close and before we answer questions. So with that, I will pass it off to Dennis to start our safety moment.
Thanks, Marcia. And so with the day and age of COVID-19, a lot of people are working from home. We're working from home. We're in that remote environment all the time, and there has been a lot of heightened COVID-related cyber activity. So the idea is always think about what you do before you make your connections or before you attempt to download software or make any additional virtual meetings using new software. Make sure that if you do manage your facility security or the technology side of the house, that you're using secured processes, VPNs, and so on, and always keep your passwords up to date and ensure that you're using proper authentication mechanisms. Can you go to the next slide? One of the things that we're seeing, and so we've got some Forbes news here, is heightened phone scams. People are sitting there at home, they're looking at their phones a lot more often, and threat actors are targeting this. Because of this, also people are accessing more things on the same computer that they normally would conduct business or that they normally wouldn't conduct business. They're using their home PCs in a lot of cases to conduct business more often. And so we're seeing where hackers are trying to either get into home financial or personal financial information from business networks more, or people are actually trying to get into business networks from people's home networks. So be vigilant, stay vigilant, be aware, and stay current on security news if you can. Things that you see in the news that come out about COVID cyber attacks are always worthwhile reads. That could very well affect your social media, your phone, your cellular phones, and even your business networks. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about some real-world incidents. We're going to switch from our safety topic over to what we're seeing in the environment. Now, as most of you know, the American Bureau of Shipping and ABS group of companies is pretty much a large player in the maritime industry. Now, maritime includes ports, terminals, oil and gas, and so on. But a lot of what we focus on is kind of this new threat vector and this new cyber industry that's occurring, and this change that's occurring in maritime. So where a lot of the other industries, Department of Defense, other government agencies, financial, healthcare, have seen cyber activity over the last 20, 30 years grow tremendously and then kind of just level out. We're seeing it start to pick up. We're kind of more in an emerging cyber threat industry, but turning into a growth threat industry. And so what we see is we see malware, we see viruses, we see what could be a script kiddie testing the waters, so to speak. And then also we'll see, if it's government related, we'll see ports and terminals or ports facilities, shipyard facilities have their information stolen about government vessels and so on. So up till the COVID-19 things that we saw recently, we saw a lot of malware attacks. And so you'll see like the Costco, the Maersk's, Clarkson shipping, things like that. But we also saw where there was specific confidentiality breaches. So San Diego, all over the world, where ship plans were stolen. So be mindful of that. Just good examples of how cyber attacks start, and then they leverage based off of exposure, what's easy to get into, and then they grow from there. And then additionally, just even last week, the week before last, we saw where a large auto manufacturer employee was approached by, a state actor who had bribed him to, steal secrets. And, I'm not going to specifically say the company names, but in that case, the employee actually resisted and reported the person, and the Department of Justice is investigating the situation. So, as I said before, these are real world attacks. These are happening. We're going to talk a little bit more about some compliance initiatives, but security is always our main priority. And so be aware of what's taking place in the industry. So if we can switch to the next slide. As most of you might be aware, especially those who work in the OT security field or the operational technology field, there is a kind of what a lot of people call a convergence, but also a level setting that needs to occur between different technologies. And so those that come from the IT side and attempt to apply cyber in the OT side, or those that are on the OT side and attempt to communicate to the IT side about what their needs are, don't always effectively communicate with each other. And so we like to kind of share this information just to kind of give you an example of what the expectations are on each side. Because we are a cyber organization. As Marcia, as in the introductions, as they said, Marcia is a cybersecurity. She was an assessor before she was in, business development manager. So we've been doing this for a while, and we still run into this exact conversation with the facilities that we work with, the ships that we work with, the crews, the staffs that we work with. So just be mindful that with IT, most IT administrators expect that their components are like in a 2 to 5 year life cycle. And now with the cloud, it's just kind of continuous. But with an OT environment, operational technology, most project managers and engineers expect that their equipment's going to last 10 to 20 years. Now that has changed, but on our side, on the maritime side, for sure, it's still kind of an expectation. The users expect high throughput. They expect availability as far as the data is concerned. Now, on the OT side, users expect that the throughput's not as high, but a delay could basically render the system unfunctional and unavailable. Fault tolerance, so the integrity of the functionality of the system, could be the difference between a functioning system and a non-functioning system. So it's not accepted. Again, the users expect that their data is secure, their personal information that they use on their business environments is not going to be exposed, and so on. So then we get to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, we're looking at confidentiality, integrity, availability across the board. But in reality, we're really, on the IT side, we're really worried about losing data, like those critical engineering plans or any kind of business or financial information, personal information. However, cybersecurity practices are relatively high. Cybersecurity has been around for many decades now. Information security has been around for many decades, and it's evolved to the point to where we have enough, common law and criminal cases to justify the implementation of cybersecurity in business. So the expectation is that it's going to be there. On the OT side, however, safety is really the key. So anything that you apply has to not impact that user expectation, cannot impact the fault tolerance of the system. It cannot impact the reliability of the system. The redundancy that's in place is designed around making sure that the system's available. However, a lot of cases, the redundancy is not designed around secure or cyber safe practices like firewalls in between the network segments and so on. Also, a lot of the cybersecurity practices in the OT environment are kind of ad hoc. They're undocumented. and they're built off of other processes. So they're kind of added to management of change processes that already exist. Are they're pieced into safety programs that focus more on personnel safety or effects on the environment, but not so much on how to actually apply the cybersecurity to the systems or manage the cybersecurity process and maintenance lifecycle. So just some things that we definitely like to share up front. This is going to kind of impact a lot of the change and a lot of the expectations that those of you who are now looking at the NAVIC requirement are going to face. So we like to talk about the bare kind of foundation of one of the issues up front, and then we're going to kind of transfer over to the other parts of the situation with regards to the updated NAVIC. So can we go ahead and move to the next slide? Okay, and so we were just talking about operational technology and information technology systems. Now in our example here, we like to go a little bit into the connectivity between those systems. And we have a really nice kind of diverse graphic with OT and IT systems that applies to maritime and shoreside systems, applies to oil and gas as well. So you'll see we have a headquarters environment here. We actually have case studies in cyber incidents that have affected something very similar to this business environment in the past. That headquarters environment has internet connectivity because it's probably not located right next to that marine terminal that's in the lower left. And then also there's a land facility that's not technically part of that terminal. It's connected to the internet. So the proximity on the diagram is probably not the actual proximity in real life. Now what we're seeing is everything in orange is a standard information technology network. So even down to the servers and laptops in that marine terminal that probably have access to control systems. They could be SCADA servers, they could be DCS servers. Technically, those are attached to IT networks. And a lot of times you'll see they're attached to IT networks using the same technology that information technology servers used in the corporate office for providing email and database services are using. In most cases, they use the same kind of Active Directory systems, Windows, Microsoft domains, same kind of, with Linux, Unix, the same types of technologies, protocols, and so on. And then there's some firewalls in our drawing, which is what looks like a brick wall in between the different networks. However, they're still connected. And we've found where, in a lot of cases, the firewalls that we look at don't necessarily have rules that protect those environments from access. Even basic cyber threat actor could actually break through those rules because there might not be a denial or something in place. Then as we kind of move from right down to the lower left, we do have the vessel on board, and this is kind of where we play a lot within ABS, but you'll also have satellite connectivity off that vessel. And so what you're seeing here is you're seeing a physical connection that goes all the way through that marine terminal, and then it could actually be a physical connection to the ship when it's there, and a lot of times it is. And then another connection to the internet on the other side. So you've got two connections to the internet on that entire network. And then with that landside facility, we've got a lot of control systems in place. Marsha's going to talk a little bit about, a scenario later that control valves, pumps, and they have sensors. They're not, control systems aren't necessarily designed with sophisticated network redundancy in place. They might have like ring topologies and things like that. However, the control system itself might have a real basic, what we call network stack implemented, where it can't handle much more than a ping request or maybe an SNMP, so a network management protocol. However, a lot of times those things are actually enabled without authentication, and so they're accessible as well. And so all we're trying to communicate here is all of these networks are connected. They have really critical infrastructure associated with them. You know, we've got oil and gas, we've got tanks, we've got what looks like a tanker ship at the bottom, and we've got a facility that looks like it could be like a downstream chemicals facility that has cargo being loaded into what looks like semi trucks. So, and a train right next to it. So if we can we go ahead and move to the next one? All right, and so let's just give you a little bit of a kind of a flash on example about exposure to industrial control systems. Right here, what you're seeing is just a real basic vulnerability. It affects SMB authentication, which is a standard Microsoft-based share authentication. In this specific scenario, 94% of 183,000 ports had this open, which meant Microsoft file sharing was open in these industrial control systems, meaning with maybe just a little bit of effort and some strategic targeting, a threat actor could probably get to a large portion of those systems. And so that's reality. This was based off of Shodan.com. You could look it up, but it's a real thing. All of these systems, all these industrial control systems, operational technology, what have you, include networks just like the one that we showed. They may not be for oil and gas. They might not be for maritime. However, they're very similar networks, and they could include power companies and other types of critical infrastructure. So it's a real world thing. So we want to point that out, and that's going to start to translate over to why we're looking at protecting facilities, and why the Coast Guard specifically has said we should look at this as a possible safety incident. So let's move to the next slide. Okay. And is this one still me, Marcia?
Yes.
Okay, just double checking. So enter the Navico 120. This is really the heart of what we're talking about today. This is something that has basically mandated cybersecurity to be applied to 105, 106 facilities in a way that complements your existing facility security plans by adding it to your facility security plans. We'll talk a little bit about how that's done. Updating your facility security assessment procedure to include cyber, and then also being able to prove that you're doing that in an audit. Some of the key highlights that we like to point out. This is a NIST-based recommendation. So even though the CFRs are already in existence, they've been auditable. The recommendation in this document is to use the National Institute of Standards and Technologies references for the foundation of your security program. It is a recommendation. It's not a requirement that you use NIST. And that you use these specific control sets to help you identify how to build a checklist, let's say. So in the 853, as I'll call it, there is a physical and environmental family of controls. There are also maintenance controls. There are controls that you can leverage out of the box. However, it's a very lengthy, complex, involved process to apply all those controls, and so you'll want to leverage some assistance with that, or develop some kind of a process to justify which controls are applied and which aren't. And then for those who aren't familiar, there is a 882 document, which a lot of people confuse with a list of controls, but actually that is industrial control system considerations on the same list of controls. So 853 has the list of controls the baseline list of controls is around 457 controls, I believe, give or take, but it translates to over 1,000 with the enhancements. And then 882 puts an overlay on top of that with our objectives and enhancements, excuse me, puts an overlay on top of that, which is at this point, I think, completed around 350 or so, but it does add interesting aspects and considerations, like for access management. If you can't lock down the workstation's console, so for example, if you can't apply a screensaver when you walk away or an automated lockout to the screen, then a compensating control would be make sure that you have 24/7 monitoring, or you have a locked door or an access control list, and that you can prove that that's in place and that you're actually auditing the access control list. So it's a really good document. Again, these are very detailed documents. And then that's all complemented by the cybersecurity framework, the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is something that we can talk a little bit more about. Has this, what we quickly call IPDRR philosophy, where it kind of follows the philosophy of how to build a cybersecurity program, from identifying your assets and your key resources all the way through how to basically build a program around recovering safely from a cybersecurity incident. So some key notes on the cybersecurity framework. The U.S. Coast Guard has worked with other organizations already. They do have example cybersecurity framework-based guidelines and what are called profiles for 104, 105, 106 facilities. So those are very helpful. They show you how to prioritize applying the cybersecurity framework to your environment, and that's something that we can talk through as well. And we've worked with the Coast Guard to develop some port facility training. So we have training that kind of talks to those things and maps out how that cybersecurity framework references the 853, but also other controls as well. Bottom line is, we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, so that's kind of an overview. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the next slide now, please, Marshall. And we'll talk about the influences on the compliance aspect of this in the next couple of slides before we transition to the next topic. So as I had mentioned, this is basically in addition to the physical security requirements that are in place. So specifically, the 105 and 106 are called out. And then the facility security policy, the plan that's in place, the 0303 is what's impacted. So that's your documentation, what have you, processes. And then the 0120 is either an addendum or an integration with that policy. And we'll talk about what that looks like on the next slide. Okay, and so I had mentioned earlier, there's an update that needs to occur to your assessment process. And so the recommendation is that you need to be able to demonstrate that you're assessing cybersecurity with your facility security assessment. And the reason for that is because at the end of the day, we're looking at security breaches, breach of security. We're looking at safety, and where these are being integrated with this specific circular is through the facility security plan. But these aspects are all included. And so I don't need to go through the whole list. Those of you who are dialed in interest of learning more about the update, you probably are already familiar with these items. However, remember, it's an organizational change. There's a behavior that has to occur, and it's going to drive training updates. It's going to drive all of the security measures that deal with physical security that houses or protects against the buildings that house and the facilities that house cyber-enabled equipment. Also the equipment that protects facilities. So security specific equipment, physical security assessment, badging systems, things that control access, whether it's fences or so on, and then how you're monitoring those systems. So it could be connectivity related. You might have these things in place already, but it could also be how you're monitoring the systems that are monitoring the systems. Are those secure? And then remember, because this is U.S. Coast Guard and because there is an emergency aspect of it, there is a preparedness aspect of it, your drills and exercises should reflect the updates. And I found throughout the years, cybersecurity drills are actually a good way to rally the entire organization around the cybersecurity training that's required. It's almost new enough still that it's exciting when you go through a cybersecurity drill or exercise with the team, because then it starts to enlighten people and they get excited about thinking like, how could I actually do a cyber attack if I wanted to? And it's just a good way to implement the program and ensure that that organizational change occurs. All right, so with that, I'm not going to go into more detail about the bullets. We can shift it to the next slide.
Okay. So the NAVIC was released earlier this year, and then in July, the Coast Guard issued a Marine Safety Information Bulletin titled Urgent Need to Protect Operational Technologies and Control Systems. This bulletin reiterated the importance of following the NAVIC 120 guidelines, but it also referenced an alert from CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which was also issued in July. And the CISA alert was issued in conjunction with NSA and recommends immediate action to reduce exposure across all OT and control systems. The call for immediate action was a response to seeing increasing attacks on OT systems, especially now that so many companies are increasing their use of remote access and OT systems are becoming more susceptible to being accessed through the internet due to everyone working from home with COVID-19. And the reason I bring all this up is because CISA is a great resource. They, in their alert, provide some recommended mitigations that are not industry specific, but just general to industrial control systems. So in this specific alert, they first actually identify some recently observed tactics and attack techniques, and then they go into these recommended mitigations, which I'll briefly go over with you. So first, they recommend to have a resilience plan for your OT. So were you to have an incident, not only have a plan for, how do you respond to it, how do you potentially prevent some virus from spreading in your equipment, but then also how do you get back into operation, how do you safely bring your critical equipment back up and running, and how do you recover and continue from that. Dennis talked about the importance of drills. Exercise your incident response plan. So drills is a great way to do this. Hardening your network. Again, this is especially important during this time where we see such an increase in remote access. So looking at your remote access networks, are they safe? Are you using a VPN? Are you filtering IP addresses? Are examples of things to look at for hardening your network. Create an accurate as operated OT network map immediately. So, and this is probably one of the largest challenges we face, surprisingly, is working with clients. We often see that they do not have updated inventories, or they might not really have an OT software inventory at all, and they don't have up-to-date drawings. The drawings might be 10 or 20 years old. And it's so important to make sure that you have an up-to-date inventory and network map because you need to know what to protect before you can protect it. Understanding and evaluating cyber risk on as operated OT assets. So I'm sure everyone is aware the first step in addressing cyber is having a risk assessment. But beyond just doing a general risk assessment, it's important to look at risks specific to the equipment that you have, maybe specific models, manufacturers, and there's a lot of resources out there that can help you with that. CISA, for one, which is who we're talking about now. There's a lot of resources that you can go to for looking at common vulnerabilities. Dennis mentioned Shodan before, so there's a lot of resources. And then lastly, implementing a continuous and vigilant system monitoring program. Some companies tend to get nervous when they hear monitoring program because they're thinking they have to implement a complex technology solution, and that's not necessarily the case. There are less mature options that can be implemented, which are perfectly appropriate depending on the risk of your systems, logging and reviewing, access attempts, things like that. So there's a lot of options. If you're looking for more resources, again, CISA is a great resource. I have this screenshot of a diagram here which offers some more best practices. And if you go to their website and search for cybersecurity best practices for industrial control systems, you should be able to find those.
And Marsha, I'd like to mention too that this absolutely complements the NAVIC. And so one of the reasons why we bring this up is because this is obviously part of a greater initiative to communicate to the industry from the Coast Guard and the NSA and federal regulatory bodies. But it absolutely complements the NAVIC. So these processes are not in vain. Everything here complements what's required in the NAVIC, and the NAVIC complements this. So you're working towards the same common objective. Thanks.
And with that, I'm actually going to hand it back over to you, Dennis, to talk about TSIs.
Okay, awesome. So we bring this up because we look at this viewed from the perspective of an actual security incident. And the reason we're looking at it this way, and the reason why the Coast Guard's looked at it this way, is because this process is already in place. Reporting a breach of security is already a known process. Updates to reporting a breach of security that includes cyber have been communicated to the industry, as far back as 2016 and even before, but formally 2016. One of the changes is, where we've got those physical security, government policy and framework boxes up at the top under administrative and physical processes. Now we're including all of these technical items. And so we'll talk a little bit about the types of technologies briefly later. However, what this means is if you have telecommunications and radio systems that rely on these types of networks, and we're seeing a lot of even radios rely on the application layer, that they have applications. You have to report any kind of a breach just as if it was a transportation security incident. And so that's the key here. We want to make sure that nothing's going to go unnoticed. But I'm going to specifically read this just to make sure everyone has this. But this is based off of a policy letter that was released. It's CG TAC 5 pop-up policy letter number 0816. And it specifically calls out how cybersecurity incidents are considered a breach of security. And so this is actually part of the requirement that anything that's unauthorized access, circumvention of security measures, instances of viruses, Trojans, malware, things like that. And of course, any kind of a denial of service attack, which means the radio or communication equipment is rendered inoperable due to some kind of connectivity or virus or malware, has to be reported just as if it's a transportation security incident. And so I don't know if everyone's doing that, but just to be aware of that, I thought I would specifically call that out. It's been out there since 2016, is a policy letter, and the number is 0816. So with that, I'll switch to the next slide.
Great. So moving on, we're gonna actually walk through a example scenario of a TSI. So in this scenario, we have certain dangerous cargo being offloaded from a vessel to facility storage tanks. So you can imagine that diagram that Dennis brought up earlier in the day, and he pointed that out, the ship docked and feeding into the storage tanks on shore. So if we look at the equipment and machinery level, we see a pump for offloading into the facility, an automated through-bay valve to regulate the flow into the tanks, a level gauge to measure how much liquid is in the tanks, as well as gas detectors and pressure safety valves. All of this equipment is controlled by or inputs to programmable logic controllers, PLCs. And the PLCs have connections to human-machine interfaces, or HMIs, as you'll hear them called most of the time. So in this specific scenario, we can assume that these HMIs are probably desktop computers, and they probably are located in designated areas. There's, obviously one on the vessel, one on shore, your cargo control room, whatever it may be. However, in our scenario, let's say that someone untrusted gained access to this area in the facility on shore. Maybe it's a disgruntled employee. And because there weren't proper physical security measures in place, the cyber threat actor was able to physically access the computer, which maybe didn't have a password, or as I often see, there might be a password, but it's written on a Post-it note in plain sight, right on top of the computer. Or potentially maybe the malicious actor didn't gain access physically, but maybe someone connected that HMI computer to the internet, and then they were able to gain access that way. Either way, the threat actor was able to corrupt the level gauge and the sensors, and therefore the cargo keeps getting pumped into tank 1 because the gauge isn't able to inform the PLC, which informs the valve to switch over to tank 2 because tank 1 is full. And since the malicious actor also disabled alarms, there are no alerts to the facility. And so now, as a consequence, the tank overflows with the dangerous cargo, and we have a major spill to deal with. So we have to worry about loss of life, property damage, and it happens to be windy that day. So now we also have to worry about the liquid spreading, something especially concerning if the facility is near a heavily populated area. So looking at this incident, let's think about, doing a root cause analysis or investigation, what it would look like to find out that this was caused by something very easily avoidable, like having a password posted in plain sight, or someone wanting to check their email, and so they connected the computer to the internet. This also emphasizes how important that this relationship is between cybersecurity and physical security. And going back to what Dennis was talking about with IT and OT, some of you might be thinking, well, that wouldn't happen, and especially on the side of being internet accessible, or we're not that integrated, our facility is not that integrated, or equipment is not that advanced, and reiterating what Dennis said about OT equipment tending to be legacy equipment. So it's in place for potentially 10 to 20 years. Well, if you think about the technological evolution within the last 20 years and replacing a system from 20 years ago with a modern one today, you could potentially be replacing what was a manual isolated system with now this newer system that's automated, has Wi-Fi, has Bluetooth, introduces all of these new risks. And so even if currently a situation like this weren't able to happen, you never know when one day you swap out some new equipment, but you're not set up to deal with that new set of risks. And so that's something to keep in the back of your mind as you're building these risk programs. So Dennis, I'll hand it back over to you to discuss the FSO role and how it can help prevent something like this.
Okay, thanks, Marcia. And we actually do have a lot of conversations about these scenarios. And in most cases, the reason it might be considered unlikely is strictly because it hasn't happened that much. Realistically, we find where it's 2020, and as Marcia said, she still sees in the assessments that she's done passwords posted on screens. So, we showed a network. Just having a firewall in place doesn't mean it's configured correctly. Just saying that someone might have connected to the internet, it's actually a real thing. We see PCs that are consoles in the same room as a PC that's a business machine, right next to each other, connected to the same printer in some cases through two different types of connections. So the FSO, you are probably already familiar with this role, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. But this is where new types of collaborations should occur, new types of activities should occur. So this role is already familiar with the safety and the security aspect of things, but this role is the key role as far as introducing cyber to the process. So what that means is there could be a learning curve. A lot of collaboration and information and knowledge can be gained through collaboration. And so things like the InfraGuard, which is designed around infrastructure and industrial control system cybersecurity collaboration, is a good organization to join. There's a lot of information out there if you're interested in getting certifications and so on. Also, it's a topic with the AMSC locally. So all of these different things are possibly new. Cybersecurity is possibly new, and then as you already are aware, the internal IT departments and departments that deal with cybersecurity on the business side are also good resources. Establish a rapport with them, and then some kind of an company interdepartmental communication process or working group would always be helpful. But then again, integrate cyber into the drills, integrate cyber into the training, integrate cyber into the exercises. So, okay, Marshall, let's go to the next one. All right, and so earlier I said, there should be an update to your facility security assessment. So, primarily what the NAVIC calls out is you have to identify vulnerabilities in your telecommunications, networking, radio equipment, that type of thing as part of your cybersecurity assessment. So as part of your facility security assessment, you need to include the identification of vulnerabilities. That's kind of a broad topic. Vulnerabilities can be a manual thing. Vulnerability could be something that's a vulnerability based off of just the physical access to the devices, or it could be a technical thing. There are vulnerability scanners out there, which, coming from kind of an IT background, I know that a vulnerability scanner is what I would use to identify vulnerabilities in a Microsoft operating system or any kind of technology, really. So these are kind of new aspects of the FSO's facility security assessment. What we see now is a lot of facilities that are trying to prepare for this are actually specifically either submitting RFIs or RFQs and RFPs for performing penetration tests and vulnerability assessments because they are attempting to be as thorough as possible. What we see in that is we'll see a lot of sensors. So we'll say, okay, well, we have 1,000 sensors and we have control systems and physical security systems, but we also have 100 network devices. We have 50 servers, and so they're specifically looking at the technical aspects of these devices. And what's interesting to me is just that they specifically called out the telecommunications and radio systems. However, we know that that includes all the computer systems and technologies that are connected to those telecommunication systems. Recommended participation. always, as I mentioned earlier, the collaboration, always involve people that can help you to get that done. And so every industrial control system, industrial and automated control system, operational technology, cybersecurity guideline out there says, make sure you have the right expertise in the room. Like, make sure you bring in the IT people that are familiar with cyber and ask for their help with regards to how to manage cyber activities. The maintenance of cyber activities is really key here, because it could be just an overwhelming, unrealistic administrative burden to attempt to build a program and then manage it without having that background. A lot of times what I see when organizations attempt to build their programs themselves, they just go over the top, they overbuild it, and then it takes them years to learn how to manage it and then streamline it and make it fit for purpose. Of course, every program, requires a charter. Every update requires a steering committee. Even at the smallest level, you have to have your management on board, executive leadership on board. It's an investment. Something has to change. The more you invest now, and I'm not saying it has to be an overwhelmingly large investment, the less you will invest later. So management being on board now will get you past that hump. If you do not invest in a cybersecurity program, if you do not build a cybersecurity program now and you fail an inspection, it will cost you more. So always have your management on board. And of course, everything that we do, Marcia and I specifically, with regards to cyber, focuses on safety first. We look at safety of personnel. And I'm using these priorities directly from one of the profiles from the Coast Guard. Safety of personnel, safety in the environment. And then we start looking at operational security impacts. And then we look at product, and we start looking at things like human resources and how it affects processes in the organization. But that comes a little later. An audit is usually our lowest priority when it comes to cyber compliance, usually our lowest priority. But it's usually the biggest drive for cybersecurity services. So let's go ahead and shift it to the next one.
Hey, Dennis, this is the other Dennis. Hey, I want to just real quick, we've got some questions that are coming in. I know we've got about 8 minutes left on our agenda here, itinerary. Is there a possibility, can we kind of speed through these quickly, or what's your preference here?
No problem, Dennis. I think I've already covered this, so we can go straight to the questions. But yeah, I'll reiterate real quickly, this update, because we look at it as documentation as far as what you're going to actually get inspected against, is could either be an annex, like a supplement, or it could be integrated directly into the program. That's just a recommendation. All right, so I think this might be our last slide, so I don't believe we have anything else if we want to go to some questions.
Yeah, sure. I'll go with the first one here online, and it's from Vic Holcomb, and he's asking, is the cyber vulnerability assessment as part of the FSA a required standard or a recommendation?
No, the vulnerability assessment is a requirement. It specifically says identify vulnerabilities in these systems. It doesn't say how to do it. It doesn't say how to do it, so that, that's subjective.
Got it. Another question we have is, how informed or educated are U.S. Coast Guard inspectors?
So I couldn't speak holistically about all of the inspectors. I do know that our organization has actually helped to develop the program around this. So, I think that might actually be a better one for me to maybe reply to later. And let me see if there's a list out there, because I don't know that there's a specific post that says how many have been through the courses, but that's a good question. We'll follow up on that one.
Yeah, and I'll throw another question. It might be kind of dovetailing from that one, but first of all, I think the granularity and the recommendation that you have here are fantastic. So much appreciated. Specifically, the stakeholder participation, and one of the things that's really interesting to me is the expanding role of the FSO from what it seems like. And a question I have along those lines is, moving beyond just paper compliance in this space, how do you prepare for an audit? In other words, how do you show the Coast Guard that it's not only just a blurb in the FSP, it's actually something that's been operationalized? And with that being said, it's got to be implemented incrementally, right, as people get up to speed and learn how to do this.
Well, this is a question that comes up a lot, and so we have a most recommended response to it, and that's there's a difference between an assessment and an audit. Now, getting an assessment is one of the best ways to prepare for an audit, because when you are assessed, you expose all of the issues that could come up. So obviously you want a qualified assessor to do it. However, that assessment report is your report. That does not have to be shared with the auditor. That is your report. So it's a good way to identify, go through the paces, so to speak, and identify the vulnerabilities and the issues that could come up before you go through the audit.
Okay. Let's see. Another question we had. Thank you for that. What are U.S. Coast Guard inspectors going to focus on? This might be an opinion piece for you, or it might be something you already know.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna call this an opinion piece, just based off of experience and what I've heard or learned. I'm not gonna say it's a specific thing because I'm not a Coast Guard inspector, but typically what they focus on is what they see, like what you tell them. So you're gonna have to give them the updated facility security assessment procedure, because it does call that out. It could be basic, but you're going to have to give them that. They're going to have to see that you've included cybersecurity vulnerabilities in that update. Based off of my experience, and I'm just strictly basing this off of my experience going through this process with other organizations and other government agencies, they may not be the highest level of cyber expertise. So they might not be able to dig too much into it. But if you do say you have a policy, program, procedure in place, you have a log in place, they're going to want evidence of that. So there will be a lot of documentation there. If you say that you did vulnerability scans, they're going to want to see the scan reports. And in those vulnerability scans, it does specifically call out that you have to make an effort to mitigate a lot of those vulnerabilities. So you're gonna have to prove that you've done that as well. But that's a little bit beyond just the documentation exercise. Definitely at first, I just see where there's still going to be a learning curve, just in my experience, and it'll get more technical as we go forward. As it gets more technical, typically what you see though is a really deep dive into security controls on the systems and vulnerability reports. However, I don't see that happening in the near term.
Yeah, and I think to that end, one of the things that could be interesting, and we've seen some of this at CFATS, I think depending on the structure of the IT department and the cyber departments, one of the pieces I think that's probably going to come up is, the local sites might not be too involved in what they're doing on the cyber side, and their corporate offices or an IT center, whatever it might be more involved. And what's your sense of the Coast Guard being flexible on interfacing with them, even though they're not on site at the time, as a component of an audit or a check?
I think it really depends on how you communicate that. So typically you should identify who the system owner is, or who the process or operational sponsor is. And especially if you've identified that you've handed that off to another organization, you may actually have an issue. So I think that they'll probably want whomever that is, and we typically call that like a sponsor, available to answer questions, or else it could end up being an issue.
Interesting. Okay. We're right at the top of the hour here. Is there a chance, will we, Jeff and Maggie, be able to get this copy of this presentation? Some folks have asked.
Yeah, I think that might have been sent over in PDF form already.
Okay. All right, good. Well, look, we want to thank both of you, Dennis and Marcia, very much for your participation today, for being with us. A huge thank you from AFPM to you and ABS Group. This is extremely applicable. I mean, a lot of insight here and super informative. I know we're sort of just starting to move forward with this, but I think this has put us in the right frame of mind. And certainly we know some things, but we also know what questions to ask now too, and much appreciated. So For our group, I hope you're able to take some of this and information, apply it to your cybersecurity compliance programs. As you may have seen in the opening loop, AFPM's next security webinar will be on September 30th. We'll discuss utilizing social media and search engines for investigations, and we certainly hope you'll all be able to join us. Until then, if you have any questions regarding this or any of our prior webinars, don't hesitate to reach out to AFPM staff. And thank you for everything. Stay safe and stay healthy. Take care.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, ABS. Everyone have a good day.
Y'all take care.
Thank you.